here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's June 9th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Seong.
Happy Friday, Yen.
Happy Friday, and Cheska Daina.
Happy Friday!
Double it.
I know, taking that a little bit further.
Double it and give it to them.
Exactly. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, the sky might look like it's from Mars, but this is actually from New York City. The city is seeing horrendous air quality because of the smoke that has drifted south from wildfires burning in Canada. Air quality levels have surpassed what the World Health Organization considers unhealthy, and that is why authorities have issued air quality advisories in the region. Now, Canada has been seeing its worst ever wildfire season. There are currently over 400 active wildfires in the country. Moving on to the second story, but still staying in the United States, we've seen Hawaii's youngest and most active volcano named Kilauea erupt early on Wednesday morning. The U.S. Geological Survey's Hawaiian Volcano Observatory detected a glow at around 4:40 a.m. The last time this volcano erupted was in January. Though there's no indication yet that populated areas are at risk, authorities have raised the alert level from watch to warning. Now, shifting gears to what's happening here in Korea. Recent internet trend stats have actually found that the number of people using the local portal Naver has dropped, especially teens and those in their 20s. A survey found that compared to those in their 30s and 40s who predominantly use the local portal, Gen Z rely on YouTube nearly the same way as older generations did with Naver. Now, experts believe this is because the younger generation prefers using visual and audio aid when taking in information. Now, we're going to take a closer look at the third news item. Naver is still at the top of the popularity game in terms of what people use to search for info in Korea, but analysts find the fact that youngsters are quickly turning to YouTube and Google should be a yellow flag for the homegrown portal. Now, another concerning point is how many are losing faith in the once revered Naver news portal. The same media survey company found that 45.6% still use Naver for their news, but a growing number flock to YouTube as well. In terms of looking for professional and academic data, though, Google had twice as many users as Naver. Now, what did you think about this news story, Cheska?
I mean, for me personally, I think this digital migration among young generation is actually quite normal. I mean, because first of all, we are the thumb generation and we want to get access to information very quickly. We don't want to read too much. So visual aid and auditory aid definitely helps in procuring information quickly. And also, we know that YouTube is level playing field for anyone. I mean, I've done a lot of research where expert interviews or even podcasts, there's just a flood of information that people publish, and it's just easier and faster to get these. But of course, we should always practice media literacy because there's absolutely no filtering whatsoever in terms of the information that gets put on YouTube.
Exactly. And as journalist to journalist, Xiang, I think it was a bit alarming for me to hear how people relied more on YouTube than Naver, which has contracts with actual journalists and actual broadcasters, right?
Yeah, I mean, to start off with just even Naver itself, it does operate a lot on blog basis as well. You do get some reference to the news outlets of South Korea, but that's quite limited, and you've got to go to another site, the actual news outlet, the broadcaster's website, to read those articles. So I think even Naver is sort of riddled with adverts quite often, with product placements and things like that, which is alarming. But YouTube, in essence, is full of fake news. A lot of it, I've experienced it firsthand. I've looked for stuff. I've actually even saw people looking up actual, showing me as evidence to their theory or something. Oh, this YouTuber said it, and it's totally nonsense.
This YouTuber said it. That's like the famous
and
quote.
To be honest, as a journalist myself, even the journalism itself, even the broadcasters, quite often lacks some evidence, quite often isn't fully covering the story. There's some, behind stories and things like that. And I think if you really want to find out information, Google Scholars, looking at different articles, actual, academic pieces of writing might be a better start.
And if I may add on to it, it's always important to cross-check, use various sources and find out what the facts are. And that was our news feed for this Friday. And let's move on to our discussion topic. From this month, South Korea has been trying to expand its telehealth services. What's that about? Take a look at the screen to find out.
COVID-19 has changed the healthcare landscape. One change is that patients can now talk with their doctor on the phone and get their medicine delivered to their doorstep. The government allowed this type of telehealth service temporarily to stop the spread of COVID-19. From February 2020 to January 2023, around 14 million Koreans received telehealth treatment. Realizing how effective these services were, officials have decided to make telehealth permanent. How? By launching a pilot program from this month. But things don't seem to be going as smooth as planned. Some doctors have adamantly voiced that they're against this measure. Half of the clinics that are supposed to be providing this service have denied patients of this latest right. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. What do millennials and Gen Z think about the latest telehealth pilot project? 2. What should be done to better institutionalize this latest health policy? 3. How have other countries dealt with telehealth services?
It's been a week since South Korea started its telehealth services pilot project, and before we go any deeper, let's talk about what this project is about. Seong, tell us exactly what the latest telehealth plan is and what it aims to do.
Yeah, so telehealth or virtual medical assistance is any form of online or landline, non-face-to-face methods of receiving medical care and medicine. Since the spread of COVID-19 in 2020, telehealth care was temporarily granted by the government until April 2023. During the 3 years, a total of around 38 million patients had virtual medical treatment. Last week on June 1st, the Ministry of Health and Welfare announced a new pilot telehealth project for a period of 3 months. Let's have a look at the details. For the 3 months period, the telehealth project targets patients with chronic illnesses with a prior record of face-to-face consultation in the past year. For patients other than chronic conditions, you must have had an offline diagnosis within 30 days to qualify for virtual treatment. Service providers are limited to local clinics, but extended to hospitals for patients with rare diseases and post-operative care. Treatment methods are either video or voice calls. Besides the benefits of convenience, it also incurs costs about 30% extra compared to in-person hospital visits.
And to my knowledge, that's actually because the government wanted to make sure that this pilot project goes as planned. And even before it kicked off this month, many people, especially doctors, seem to be very against this.
Quite a controversy there.
Exactly. So why don't you walk us through what the controversy was?
Sure. And since COVID, telehealth sort of became a standard practice because, as we know, not many people could actually go and see the doctor because it's a contagious disease, and also, you know, the elderly and people who went mobile. So it sort of became a standard practice then. So when the government decided to take the project a little bit further, it definitely rose some controversies. Now, I think the first one is obviously lack of regulation at the moment. There is no set law or standard about what's allowed and what's not. I mean, can people just get prescription drugs to telehealth? How much can they get it? And also in terms of limitations in terms of physical exams. I mean, you can describe your symptoms, but you won't be able to see how the patient walks or how the patient feels, or, you know, be able to physically touch or examine.
Skin tones and all that, you'll be missing out.
Exactly, being able to see it. And, you know, even skin color, like what if you don't have the most high quality camera that transmits all the data? So there's a lot of things that doctors are concerned about in terms of misdiagnosis or not being able to properly treat the patient.
For sure. Xiong, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I mean, I've read quite a few articles on it, and 3 things that doctors are mostly concerned about is, you know, one of them is definitely misdiagnosis. The second would be worries of over-commercialization of medical care. We've been seeing different startups and different platforms, medical platforms, trying to get into the field and make some money from it, which might be very concerning for the doctors themselves. Lastly, concerns about the collapse of the medical delivery system, medicine delivery system.
For sure.
So, you know, conventionally, medicine is safely delivered to the local pharmacy. Well, they get distributed if you bring your prescription. But if it's on an online basis, if everybody can deliver medicine, there's going to be quite a bit of worries about medicine getting lost in the middle.
Who's actually getting them?
Who's actually getting, you don't know receiving end. You might have signed up for your parents' medicine instead and get it sent to your home and you take it yourself.
That's very true.
Yeah, we don't see the reason for it, but that might be the case.
There's still many loopholes that need more work for sure. And before we continue our talks, we're also going to hear what our viewers had to say on today's topic. And we asked them what they think about telehealth services. So take a look at the screen to find out. Now, Kyle Y. Kim said, I live in Canada and I've been seeing my doctors online for years now. There are medical fields whereas an in-person session doesn't make any difference, and I can even get my pills delivered to my doorstep. Breakaway 2X said, while it certainly shouldn't replace in-person appointments, it's a great addition for cases or situations where in-person is not necessary. Some conditions can be diagnosed based on symptoms only, and others like mental or psychological issues can also be done. Karen Kumar said, my opinion on online medication is it should be seen as an additional facility, but people should not totally rely on it because if you go to a doctor, it will be more suitable. But in times like COVID-19, online medication was very helpful. So you can see that even for our viewers, they have different thoughts as to whether telehealth services is the way to go. Then where do you guys stand on this issue, starting with Cheska?
I actually loved all the comments from our viewers, and there are all the parts I do agree with. I think in some specific cases, especially mental services and during cases like COVID and also follow-up care, I think telehealth can be beneficial. It's a slightly different scenario, but now mail-in test kits are becoming more popular. You can do a test and mail in and get your results. And during COVID, I personally experienced my grandparents having extreme difficulty trying to get an appointment with a doctor just to getting there, and especially people with disabilities who are immobile. So I think there are definitely some benefits of technology that we can take advantage of. However, I do agree that the regulation and the fear of medicine delivery and accountability is a huge problem. I mean, who are we going to take to court if something goes sour? Is it my computer for not delivering my facial expressions or my facial color properly? Or is it the doctor for the misdiagnosis? Or is it the patient for not providing enough information through telehealth?
Some might say even the government. Is it the fault of the government for
implementing the whole system?
Exactly.
So I mean, like for me, whilst I'm not completely against telehealth services, it's a bit concerning, the worries of misdiagnosis, but also it's very limiting, consequently having a far less sort of accurate diagnosis from the doctors, especially if it's the first time you're getting treatment. So I mean, as our viewers said, Canada and as personal experience, Israel also has sort of online pharmacy systems going on. And COVID-19 diagnosis, as you mentioned, was a lot easier. Because it's a respiratory symptom, you can get your self-test kits delivered to your home, and the doctors can just look if you're doing it well and be like, oh, that's positive. Yeah, some pills. Have a couple of weeks of rest.
There was no other test that needed to be done other than shoving your nose.
But depending on the department, whether it's orthopedics, otolaryngology, cancer, dermatology, some sections should be allowed and disallowed. Of course, things like dermatology might be a lot easier. You can actually just get a diagnosis from the physical examination of looking at the skin. And there have been a few startups that does clinic referrals. For the domestic ones in South Korea, there's ones called Scandem. I think Linkaverse, Lulu Labs already showcased the capacity for dermatological scanning based on AI data. So they could just quickly scan it and give the doctors an initial idea of what the patients might be doing. So I think for dermatology and certain sections like orthopedics might be a bit difficult because you've got to see if your bone's broken or not.
Like which part hurts, actually touch it.
But certain departments of medicine, I think the telehealth care is very useful.
And you guys both made very compelling arguments, but we're also going to include an integral part of this discussion, which is an actual doctor, and we're going to hear what he has to say on this matter. We'll include him in our talks right after this. Whether South Korea should properly implement telehealth services in hospitals and clinics has been the talk of the town since COVID-19. And from this month, authorities have launched a pilot project to test this virtual medical examination option out. But as we discussed before, many doctors have sternly opposed this. To find out why, we're going to include a professor of molecular medicine and biopharmaceutical sciences in our talks. It's Professor Howard Lee from Seoul National University. Welcome, Professor Lee.
Happy Friday. It feels like I have to imitate the way that you started the news show.
Fantastic.
Yes,
Good morning,
we're
Professor.
feeling the positive vibes in the air right now. Now, Professor Lee, I would like to ask you the first question. What are the main arguments behind this so-called telehealth controversy in Korea? And what are doctors saying, and why is the health ministry still trying to push this?
That's $1 million question. Well, in general, doctors are not in favor of telehealth, or I should say they vehemently oppose that. Patient safety is their primary concern. So if something goes wrong, such as misdiagnosis or patient outcome, untoward patient outcome, who is going to be responsible? I mean, legally and non-legally as well. And a lot of doctors are very much concerned about this possibility, particularly in a context such as in Korea as of now, where many people are not quite into, are against the way that doctors are doing their, clinical businesses. So many doctors are really concerned about if they might be, they could be put into a front line if something goes wrong, even though they do not necessarily have not done a job wrong. So that is the primary concern. Of course, the quality of service is not guaranteed. We don't have any control over the validity of tools, equipment that will be used in telehealth. You know what? Traditionally, there are 4 different ways we can rely on when we diagnose a patient. Auscultation, hearing, and palpation and touch and percussion, something like this, and also visual diagnosis. And if we rely on telehealth, we have to rely only one of them, a visual diagnosis. So basically, it rips doctors a lot of diagnostic tools that we haven't familiar with using them. And also, it is administratively more taxing. We do not know how to confirm the validity of patients' identity using telehealth. And that list goes on and on and on. So that's why doctors are not in quite favor of telehealth. But the government is still pushing this new modality of medical service, because as we collectively as a society, as we have watched it in the COVID-19 pandemic, telehealth might work in some situations. So the government does not want to let it go as a one-off. And also, right.
Go ahead.
No. That is the main kind of motivation by the government, because the government has a long belief that continuous uninterrupted care of patients with chronic disease is quite important, particularly not only for the patients as well, but it will eventually reduce the health costs in general. So that is something that can be achieved by adopting telehealth into South Korea. That is. Yeah.
And I think the government itself is trying to promote the industry itself, the telehealth, the virtual medication, the system as an industry itself, part of the 4th Industrial Revolution and things like that to get into the future. But Professor, what do you think needs to be done for this type of health services, sort of online health services, to be institutionalized and maybe have a success in the future?
Well, you know what? Currently, telehealth is not institutionalized in the Medical Services Act. So, telehealth, legally speaking, it is against the current existing law in South Korea. So, the Congress should revamp the law and legally authorize telehealth and its related services. I think that's why the government started first a pilot project as of June 1st, as you mentioned, before they pursue additional legal route. So I think it is very indispensable to first show that the pilot project will have worked out as it was planned and expected to. And the protection of personal information, particularly sensitive personal information, is very important because many patients will use some kind of apps. And the private information will remain on those apps. And who is going to control over those kind of pieces, sensitive personal information? I mean, there is no current standard or legal sort of way to protect patients from their private information being stolen. So that is something that we have to really seriously consider before we go further. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the validation of equipment is quite important. Well, you know, in telehealth, I mean, a doctor once, asked the patient to measure his or her blood pressure, and then we do not really know whether the equipment tool, blood pressure monitoring tool, has been validated. Do we have to rely on whatever numbers that it will come up? It is something that need to be discussed further. But nobody has talked about that kind of validation quite deeply yet.
And Professor, you definitely gave us a lot of very important considerations that we need to take into account. So I think in this case, precedents are always very important. So are there any other countries that have implemented telehealth, and what can we possibly learn from it, and what can Korea implement that have been effective in moving further?
Well, not many before COVID-19. Only the U.S., Canada, and Norway is another country, particularly for the Arctic area, as we may understand. I mean, the geographical situation, peculiarity of Norway. Well, you know, when it comes to the U.S., telehealth has been effective since early 1990, particularly through the Medicare program for the elderly. But still, telehealth has remained a minuscule part of that of the program in general. But what I think by learning, lessons obtained from those previous experiences, I think I can sort out a couple of success factors that we have to adopt if we really want to. Telehealth can become another modality, new modality of medical services.
Right, Professor, due to time, could you narrow it down to one, please? We would love to hear it, but one point would be great. Thank you.
Oh, well, strong government involvement is quite important. Right.
For sure, strong government involvement, because as you mentioned, there's still issues we should consider: accountability, accuracy, and privacy. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. It was such a pleasure to hear from you today.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right, and we're going to move on to the final thoughts of today's episode. What are some things we need to keep in mind then for this type of telehealth service pilot project to go the way, as the doctor mentioned, to go successfully then?
I mean, Dr. Lee mentioned so many great points that I was soaking everything in, and there are some considerations that he brought up that we didn't even could think about. But I think he mentioned in the last point, active and proper government involvement. I think regulation is definitely a key in this case. So how much government gets involved
must be able to represent the opinions of all participants of the medical care system, especially doctors, medical institutions, and the patients themselves. And of course, the primary concern must be the quality of medical care that the patients will be receiving. So I think the concern lies there.
All right, and that's all we have for you today, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Xiang.
My pleasure.
And Jessica Dainong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next week. We are
News Generation.